A truck driver approached the millionaire and told him not to take that road with his wife. The next morning, there was a luxury car and 3 men dressed in black near her humble truck. The rain hammered against the windshield like angry fists, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before the wipers swept them away. Grace Turner gripped the steering wheel of her 18-wheeler with calloused hands, her knuckles white against the worn leather. 15 years on these roads had taught her to read the weather like scripture, and tonight's storm was promising nothing but trouble. The Seab radio crackled to life beside her. Breaker 19. This is Roaddog heading eastbound on I-40. Anyone know what's happening up ahead? Traffic's backing up something fierce. Grace reached for the handset, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. This is Golden Eagle, Roaddog, bridge construction at mile marker 127. But that's not your biggest problem. Word is there's flooding near Canyon Road. I'd stick to the interstate if I were you. Copy that, Golden Eagle. Thanks for the heads up. Stay safe out there. Grace set the radio down and glanced at the digital clock on her dashboard. 11:47 p.m. She'd been driving for 12 hours straight. Her cargo of electronics needed to reach Phoenix by morning, but something told her this night was far from over. The storm seemed to be following her, like it had a purpose she couldn't quite understand. She pulled into the next truck stop. The neon sign flickering 24-hour fuel in electric blue against the black sky. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few other trucks and a sleek black BMW that looked completely out of place among the diesel rigs and chrome bumpers as Grace climbed down from her cab, pulling her worn leather jacket tight against the wind. She noticed 2 figures standing near the BMW, even through the rain. She could tell they were arguing. The man wore an expensive suit that was getting soaked, while the woman beside him held a designer purse over her perfectly styled blonde hair. Grace minded her own business. 15 years on the road had taught her that lesson too. She headed toward the convenience store, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. But as she passed the couple, something made her stop. Telling you, Nathan, if we take the interstate, we'll be hours late, the woman was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. The GPS says Canyon Road is the fastest route. And I'm telling you, Natalie, that I don't trust that GPS in this weather, the man replied, running his hand through his dark hair. We should play it safe. Grace felt her heart skip a beat. The name hit her like a physical blow. Nathan Hale. She'd been searching for that name for 20 years. And here it was, spoken casually in a truck stop parking lot in the middle of nowhere. She turned slowly, studying the man's face under the harsh lights. Mid-40s, strong jawline, eyes that seemed kind even in frustration. He looked nothing like the monster she'd imagined all these years. This couldn't be the same Nathan Hale, could it? Excuse me, Grace heard herself saying, her voice barely audible over the storm. Both the man and woman turned to look at her, and she felt suddenly self-conscious in her faded jeans and work boots. Yes, Nathan asked, his tone polite but questioning. Grace swallowed hard. I couldn't help but overhear. You're thinking about taking Canyon Road tonight. Natalie's eyes flashed with irritation. And you are, Grace Turner. I've been driving these roads for 15 years, she said, her voice growing stronger. Sir, please, don't take Canyon Road tonight. Not in this weather. Nathan's expression shifted, becoming more attentive. Why, what's wrong with it? The road follows the canyon wall, and when it rains like this, there are rock slides. The guardrails are old, and the bridge. Grace paused, remembering another stormy night 5 years ago. The bridge gets unstable. I've seen too many accidents on that road. Natalie laughed, a sound like ice breaking. Nathan, seriously, we're taking driving advice from a truck driver now. Grace felt the familiar sting of condescension, but she pressed on. Ma'am, I'm not trying to interfere, I've lost people on that road. Good people. And I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you both when I could have prevented it. Something in Grace's tone made Nathan study her more carefully. There was a sincerity in her brown eyes that cut through the rain and the noise of the storm. This wasn't someone looking for a tip or trying to impress them. This was someone who genuinely cared about their safety. What would you recommend? Nathan asked, ignoring Natalie's exasperated sigh. Take Highway 89 north to the junction, then cut back east on Route 17. It'll add maybe an hour to your trip, but you'll get there alive. Grace's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. I know it's not what you want to hear, but trust me on this. Nathan looked at his wife, then back at Grace. You really think Canyon Road is that dangerous tonight? I know it is. Grace's voice was quiet, but firm. 5 years ago, my husband took that road in weather just like this. He was an experienced driver, knew these mountains like the back of his hand. They found his truck at the bottom of the canyon the next morning. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and genuine concern. Nathan felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time someone had shown him such honest, selfless care? Thank you, he said simply. We'll take your advice. Nathan, Natalie protested. We're already going to be late for our reservation. This is our anniversary dinner we're talking about. Better late than never making it at all, Nathan replied. His decision made, he turned back to Grace. I'm Nathan Hale, by the way, and this is my wife, Natalie. Grace's heart pounded at the confirmation, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. Nice to meet you both. I hope you have a safe trip. As Grace walked away, she could hear Natalie's voice rising in frustration, but Nathan's responses were calm and final. She'd given him the information. What he did with it was up to him. Inside the convenience store, Grace's hands shook as she poured coffee from the pot that had been sitting there for hours. Nathan Hale, after all these years of searching, of wondering, of planning, he'd walked into her life during a storm, and he wasn't what she'd expected at all. The man who'd just listened to her advice, who'd thanked her with genuine gratitude, didn't seem capable of the cruelty she'd attributed to the Hale name. But then again, evil rarely announced itself with horns and a pitchfork. Through the store window, she watched Nathan and Natalie get into their BMW. The car pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Highway 89. Just as she'd suggested, Grace felt a strange mix of satisfaction and confusion. She'd potentially saved the life of the man she'd spent 2 decades wanting to destroy. The storm continued to rage outside, but Grace no longer felt like it was chasing her. Instead, it felt like it had delivered something, or someone, directly to her doorstep. As she returned to her truck, she couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was just the beginning of something much bigger. The CB radio crackled again as she settled back into her driver's seat. Golden Eagle, this is Roaddog, that bridge you warned me about. Just heard on the news it collapsed about an hour ago. You probably saved my life tonight. Grace picked up the handset, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. Glad you're safe, Roaddog. That's what we're here for. Looking out for each other. As she said the words, she wondered if they applied to Nathan Hale too. The man she'd been taught to hate had just become the man she'd helped save. The storm was finally beginning to clear, but Grace Turner's life was about to become more complicated than she'd ever imagined. The Highland Vista Resort sat perched on a cliff overlooking the valley like a crown jewel, its warm lights cutting through the darkness of the storm. Nathan pulled the BMW into the circular driveway, relieved to have made it safely. Despite Natalie's continued complaints about the detour, the extra hour on the road had been worth it. They'd passed 3 accidents on the interstate, and the radio had confirmed that Canyon Road Bridge had indeed collapsed just after midnight. I still can't believe you listened to that woman, Natalie muttered, as the valet approached their car. We missed our dinner reservation because of some truck driver's paranoia. Nathan handed the keys to the young man in the red vest, then turned to face his wife. That truck driver probably saved our lives tonight, Nat. The bridge collapsed. If we'd taken Canyon Road like you wanted. Fine, whatever, Natalie said, adjusting her designer dress as they walked toward the resort entrance. But this whole trip is supposed to be about us. Nathan, our 10th anniversary. Can we please focus on that now? The lobby was exactly what Nathan had expected from a 5-star resort. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that cost a fortune, but never looked like it was trying too hard. Their suite on the top floor had a panoramic view of the valley, complete with a private balcony and a bottle of champagne waiting on ice. Now this is more like it, Natalie said, kicking off her heels and walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Much better than some greasy truck stop. Nathan loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of the champagne, his mind still on the woman at the gas station. Grace Turner. There had been something about her, a genuine concern that he rarely encountered in his world of corporate meetings and calculated conversations. When was the last time someone had cared about his well-being without wanting something in return? You're thinking about her again, aren't you? Natalie's voice had an edge to it that Nathan had learned to recognize over the years. About who? That truck driver. I can see it in your face. You get that same look whenever someone fawns over you at those charity events. Nathan set down his glass and turned to face his wife. She wasn't fawning, Natalie. She was trying to help us. There's a difference. Is there? Natalie moved closer, her blue eyes studying his face. You've always been too trusting, Nathan. Too willing to believe that people are good. It's going to get you in trouble someday. The irony of her words would hit him much harder in just a few hours. They ordered room service. Lobster and filet mignon. The kind of meal that cost more than most people made in a week. They talked about the business, about their plans for expanding into the Southwest markets, about everything except what Nathan was really thinking about. As the night wore on, Natalie grew increasingly affectionate, more so than she'd been in months. I love you, Nathan, she whispered, as they lay in the king-sized bed, her head on his chest. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. These 10 years have been everything I dreamed of. Nathan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her expensive perfume. I love you too, Nat. Happy anniversary. But something felt off. Natalie's words seemed rehearsed. Like lines from a script she'd been practicing, Nathan pushed the thought away. Maybe he was just tired from the long drive and the stress of the storm. He fell asleep holding his wife, completely unaware that it would be the last peaceful moment of his marriage. Nathan woke to cold sheets and an empty bed. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. in harsh red numbers. He reached across the bed, expecting to find Natalie's warmth, but found only rumpled silk sheets. Nat, he called softly, sitting up and looking around the darkened suite. The bathroom door was open, and no light came from within. The living area of the suite was quiet, concerned. Nathan slipped on his robe and padded barefoot across the marble floor. The suite was empty, but the balcony door was slightly ajar. Maybe she'd gone outside for some air. Natalie sometimes had trouble sleeping in new places. He stepped onto the balcony, the cool mountain air raising goosebumps on his arms. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky full of stars. But Natalie wasn't there either. Growing more worried, Nathan decided to check the resort grounds. Maybe she'd gone to the spa, or down to the bar for a nightcap. He dressed quickly and took the elevator down to the lobby, which was dimly lit and staffed only by a sleepy night clerk. Excuse me, Nathan approached the desk. Have you seen my wife, blonde, about 5'6", wearing a blue nightgown? The clerk consulted his computer screen. Mr. Hale, right. Your wife checked out a key to cabin 12 about an hour ago. Said she wanted some privacy to make a phone call. Cabin 12. Nathan knew the resort's layout. The private cabins were scattered throughout the property, designed for guests who wanted complete isolation. Why would Natalie need privacy for a phone call? And why hadn't she told him where she was going? The walk to cabin 12 took Nathan through a winding path lined with carefully manicured gardens. Security lights illuminated the way, but the shadows between them seemed deeper than they should. As he approached the cabin, he could see warm light glowing through the windows and hear the soft murmur of conversation. Nathan's steps slowed as he got closer. Something about this felt wrong, like he was about to discover something he wasn't supposed to know. But he'd come this far. He couldn't turn back now. The cabin's windows were tall and uncurtained, probably because guests expected complete privacy. Nathan positioned himself where he could see inside without being seen. What he found made his blood run cold. Natalie sat on the cabin's sofa, still in her silk nightgown, but her posture was nothing like the sleepy wife he'd left in bed. She was alert, focused, talking animatedly to someone on her laptop screen. The video call was crystal clear, and Nathan could see the other person perfectly. Derek Vaughn, his company's head legal counsel, the ambitious young lawyer who joined Hale Construction 5 years ago and quickly worked his way up to becoming Nathan's right hand. Derek was in what looked like his home office, despite the late hour. Telling you the accident didn't happen, Natalie was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the thin mountain air. That truck driver woman interfered. Nathan listened to her instead of following the GPS. Nathan felt the world tilt on its axis. Accident. What accident? Derek's voice was equally clear through the laptop speakers. This complicates things. Natalie, we can't wait much longer. Every day we delay increases the risk of discovery. I know. Natalie said, running her hands through her hair in frustration. "But we have to be smart about this. If Nathan dies in some random accident tomorrow, people will ask questions." Nathan's legs nearly gave out. They were talking about killing him. His wife of 10 years and his most trusted employee were planning his murder. "What about on the way back?" Derek suggested. "Different route, different method. Make it look like a carjacking gone wrong or a random highway robbery." "Maybe," Natalie said. "But Derek, what if that woman recognizes us? What if she remembers our faces, our names?" Derek leaned forward on the screen. "Grace Turner, right? I ran a background check after you mentioned her. Just a truck driver. Nobody important. If she becomes a problem, we'll handle her too." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. Not only were they planning to kill him, but they were threatening an innocent woman who'd done nothing but try to help them. $500 million, Derek, Natalie continued. "That's what the life insurance policy pays out, plus my inheritance from the company. We just need to be patient a little longer." "I've been patient for 5 years, Derek replied. "Ever since we started this relationship, I've been patient. I'm tired of pretending to be your husband's loyal employee while watching him touch you, kiss you, call you his wife." Natalie's laugh was cold and sharp. "Jealous, after all this time. Aren't you? Don't you want to be free of him? To be with me openly? To live the life we've planned?" "Of course I do," Natalie said, her voice softening. "I can't wait to be Mrs. Derek Vaughn instead of Mrs. Nathan Hale. But we have to do this right. One mistake, and we lose everything." Nathan had heard enough, more than enough. He backed away from the window slowly, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they'd hear it. 20 feet from the cabin, he turned and ran, not caring about the noise, not caring about dignity, just needing to get away from the nightmare he'd stumbled into. His marriage was a lie. His most trusted employee was a traitor, and the woman he'd shared a bed with for 10 years had been planning his murder for God knows how long. As Nathan reached his suite, one thought echoed in his mind. If Grace Turner hadn't warned them about Canyon Road, he'd already be dead. The truck driver with the calloused hands and honest eyes had saved his life, while the people closest to him were plotting to end it. He sat on the edge of the bed where he'd held his wife just hours before, and began to plan. If Natalie and Derek wanted to play games, he'd show them what a real player looked like. But first, he needed to find Grace Turner again. She'd saved his life once. Maybe she could help him save it again. Nathan barely slept the rest of the night, every time he closed his eyes. He heard Natalie's voice discussing his death like she was planning a dinner party. When dawn finally broke over the mountains, he was already dressed and sitting on the balcony with his laptop, researching private investigators in the Phoenix area. Natalie returned to their suite around 6 a.m. Slipping into bed quietly and pretending to sleep, Nathan watched her through half-closed eyes, marveling at how peaceful she looked, like an angel, not a would-be murderer. When she finally woke up an hour later, her performance was flawless. "Good morning, handsome," she purred, stretching like a cat. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Nathan replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Too much excitement from last night, I guess." It was pretty exciting," Natalie said, moving closer to him. "Maybe we should make it a tradition. More spontaneous trips, more adventure." The word adventure made Nathan's stomach turn. He forced a smile. "Sounds perfect. Why don't you order room service? I need to make a few business calls." "On our anniversary weekend," Natalie pouted, but Nathan caught something calculating in her eyes. "Can't the company survive without you for 2 days?" "Just a few quick calls," Nathan assured her, already moving toward the balcony with his phone. "I'll be done before breakfast arrives." The first call went to Marcus Webb, a private investigator whose name had appeared at the top of every search result. Webb's reputation was impeccable, 20 years with the FBI before going private, specializing in corporate fraud and personal security. "Mr. Hale," Webb's voice was gravelly but alert, despite the early hour. "What can I do for you? I need a complete background investigation on 2 people, and I need it done quietly and quickly," Nathan said, keeping his voice low. "My wife, Natalie Hale, and my head legal counsel, Derek Vaughn. Both of them." Webb's tone sharpened with professional interest. "What exactly are we looking for? Everything, financial records, phone logs, travel history, personal relationships. Anything that might indicate? Nathan paused, the words feeling surreal. That they might be conspiring against me. I see. How quickly do you need this information? Yesterday, Nathan replied. But I'll settle for by the end of the week. Money is no object. Understood. I'll start immediately. One question, Mr. Hale. Are you in any immediate danger? Nathan glanced back at the suite where Natalie was humming softly as she looked at the room service menu. I honestly don't know. After hanging up with Webb, Nathan made his second call. This one was more personal and potentially more dangerous. Good morning, this is Rodriguez Trucking Services. A cheerful female voice answered. Hi, I'm looking for one of your drivers, Grace Turner. I met her last night and wanted to thank her for her help. Grace Turner. The woman paused. Sir, we don't have a driver by that name. Nathan's heart sank. Are you sure? Mid-30s? Drives a blue and silver rig. I know all our drivers, sir. Could you have the company name wrong? Nathan thanked her and hung up, frustrated but not deterred. Grace Turner was out there somewhere, and he was going to find her. She'd saved his life once. Maybe she could help him figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, 50 miles away, Derek Vaughn was having his own difficult morning. He sat in his home office, surrounded by law books and case files, but his mind was entirely focused on the problem of Nathan Hale's continued existence. Derek had been planning this for 5 years. Ever since the day he discovered the truth about his father's death, Thomas Vaughn had been found dead in his study when Derek was in law school, officially ruled a suicide. But Derek had found his father's hidden files, documents that revealed a very different story. Thomas Vaughn had been George Hale's partner in crime, helping forge documents and steal land from dozens of families throughout the 1990s. When some of their victims started asking questions, George had decided his partner was becoming a liability. The suicide had been carefully staged, but Derek knew better. He'd spent years working his way into Nathan's company, earning trust, learning weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Natalie had been an unexpected gift, a beautiful, greedy woman who was easier to seduce than Derek had dared hope. But now their carefully laid plans were unraveling because of one interfering truck driver. Derek picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. Brennan, a rough voice answered. It's Vaughn. I need information on someone. Jack Brennan was the kind of man Derek normally wouldn't associate with. A former cop who'd been kicked off the force for excessive violence and now made his living in the gray areas of private security. But sometimes desperate situations called for desperate measures. What kind of information? Brennan asked. A truck driver named Grace Turner. I need to know everything about her. Where she lives, where she works, who she really is. This gonna be a problem that needs solving. Derek hesitated. He'd never crossed that line before, never ordered actual violence. But $500 million and a lifetime of revenge were at stake. Let's start with information, he said finally. We'll see where it goes from there. Back at the resort, Nathan was struggling to maintain his facade during breakfast. Natalie chattered about their plans for the day. A couple's massage, lunch on the terrace, maybe some hiking if the weather held. Every suggestion sounded like a potential opportunity for an accident. You seem distracted, Natalie observed, cutting into her eggs Benedict with surgical precision. Are you feeling all right? Just thinking about work, Nathan lied. The Henderson project is behind schedule, and we're hemorrhaging money. Derek will figure it out, Natalie said confidently. He's brilliant with logistics. You worry too much, Nathan. You need to learn to delegate more. The casual way she said Derek's name made Nathan's skin crawl. How long had they been lovers? How many times had Derek sat across from him in meetings, discussing business strategy while planning his murder? You're right, Nathan agreed. Derek is very thorough. Exactly. He thinks of everything. Natalie smiled, and Nathan wondered if she realized she was basically confessing. You can trust him completely. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus Webb, already earning his fee. Found your truck driver, not who she appears to be. Can you meet this afternoon? Nathan's pulse quickened. Actually, Nat, I just remembered. I need to handle something in Phoenix this afternoon. Rain check on the hiking. Natalie's smile faltered for just a moment. Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm afraid not, but you should enjoy the spa. Relax, get that massage you wanted. I'll be back by dinner. If you insist, Natalie said, but Nathan caught something else in her voice. Relief. I suppose I could use some pampering. As Nathan prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that Natalie was already planning her next move. The failed accident on Canyon Road had bought him time, but not much. Whatever Derek and Natalie had planned next, he needed to be ready. The drive to Phoenix gave Nathan time to think. Grace Turner, if that was even her real name, had appeared in his life at exactly the right moment. Was it coincidence, or was there more to her story? Webb's text suggested the latter, and Nathan found himself both curious and grateful. Webb's office was in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place that specialized in solving problems rich people didn't want to acknowledge. The investigator himself was exactly what Nathan had expected. Mid-50s. Silver hair. Eyes that had seen too much. Your wife and Derek Vaughn have been having an affair for 3 years, Webb said without preamble, sliding a folder across his desk. They've been very careful, but not careful enough. Hotel records, credit card receipts, phone logs, it's all there. Nathan opened the folder, his hands surprisingly steady. The evidence was overwhelming. Photos of Natalie and Derek together, financial records showing money transferred to offshore accounts, even recordings of intimate phone conversations. There's more, Webb continued. Derek's background isn't what it appears to be. His father was Thomas Vaughn. And I found some very interesting connections between Thomas Vaughn and your father's business dealings in the 1990s. Nathan looked up sharply. What kind of connections? The kind that got people killed, Webb said grimly. But that's not why you're really here, is it? You want to know about Grace Turner? Nathan nodded, his throat suddenly dry. Webb opened another folder. Grace Turner doesn't exist. The woman you met has been using that identity for 20 years. Her real name is Isabelle Monroe, and Mr. Hale. She has every reason in the world to want you dead. Nathan's world tilted on its axis for the second time in 24 hours. Isabelle Monroe, he repeated slowly, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. Why does that sound familiar? Webb leaned back in his leather chair, studying Nathan's reaction carefully. Because your father destroyed her family, Mr. Hale, George Hale and Thomas Vaughn, Derek's father, orchestrated one of the biggest land grabs in Arizona history back in the late 90s. The Monroe family owned 15,000 acres of prime development land. Your father wanted it, so he took it. Took it how? Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper. Forged documents, bribed officials, fabricated liens, classic corporate theft, dressed up in legal paperwork. When James Monroe tried to fight back, they crushed him. The man lost everything. His land, his money, his reputation. He killed himself rather than face bankruptcy and disgrace. Nathan felt sick. And Isabelle was 19 years old when she watched her father put a gun to his head, Webb said grimly. She disappeared after the funeral, assumed a new identity, and has been living as Grace Turner ever since. The question is, what was she doing at that truck stop last night? Nathan stared at the photographs in the file. A young woman with dark hair and defiant eyes, standing beside a man who looked broken and defeated, even 20 years later. He could see Grace in that face. You think she's working with Derek and Natalie? It's possible, Webb admitted. The timing is awfully convenient. Your wife plans to kill you on Canyon Road, and suddenly Isabelle Monroe appears to steer you away from danger. Could be she wanted to be the one to do it herself. Nathan shook his head. No, you didn't see her last night, Webb. The way she looked when she told us about her husband dying on that road. That pain was real. Her husband did die on that road, Webb confirmed. Robert Turner, 5 years ago. Truck went off the cliff during a storm, just like she said. But here's the interesting part. He wasn't really her husband. Robert Turner was a private investigator she hired to help track down information about your family. They fell in love during the investigation and got married under her assumed identity. The pieces were starting to come together in Nathan's mind, forming a picture that was both more complex and more dangerous than he'd imagined. So she's been hunting my family for 20 years, and getting closer every year, Webb confirmed. Robert's death set her back, but she never stopped looking. My guess is, she found you, Mr. Hale. The question is, what does she plan to do now? Nathan made a decision that would change everything. I want to meet with her. Webb raised an eyebrow. That's probably not a good idea. Maybe not, but it's what I'm going to do. Can you find her? Already did. She's staying at the Desert Wind Motel about 10 miles from here. But Mr. Hale, if I'm right about her intentions, then I need to know, Nathan interrupted. I need to look her in the eye and understand what I'm dealing with. Besides, my wife and her lover are already planning to kill me. How much worse can it get? 2 hours later, Nathan sat in his BMW outside the Desert Wind Motel, gathering courage he didn't know he possessed. The motel was exactly the kind of place where someone hiding from the world would stay. Cheap, anonymous, and far from the kind of establishments where the Hale name carried weight. Grace's truck was parked outside room 127, its blue and silver paint job looking tired in the harsh afternoon sun. Nathan had rehearsed what he wanted to say during the drive. But now that he was here, all his carefully planned words seemed inadequate. He knocked on the door, 3 soft raps that sounded thunderous in the desert silence. "Just a minute," came Grace's voice from inside, followed by the sound of footsteps and a chain being removed. The door opened, and Nathan found himself face to face with the woman who had saved his life, and might also be planning to end it. Grace was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Without the storm and the harsh lighting of the truck stop, Nathan could see the resemblance to the young woman in Webb's photographs. "Nathan," Grace's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been fear. What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Nathan said simply. "May I come in?" Grace hesitated, her hand still on the door handle. Nathan could see her calculating, weighing options. Finally, she stepped aside and let him enter. The motel room was small and generic, but Grace had made it her own in small ways. A thermos of coffee sat on the nightstand next to a worn paperback novel. Her few belongings were neatly arranged, giving the space a sense of temporary order. "How did you find me?" Grace asked, closing the door but remaining near it, as if she might need to run. "I hired an investigator," Nathan replied, taking a seat in the room's single chair. "I know who you really are, Isabelle." The name hit her like a physical blow. Grace, Isabelle, went very still, her brown eyes searching Nathan's face for signs of threat or deception. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isabelle Monroe," Nathan continued gently, "daughter of James Monroe. Your father owned 15,000 acres that my father stole through forged documents and legal manipulation. Your father killed himself rather than face the disgrace, and you've been looking for revenge ever since." Isabelle sank onto the edge of the bed, her careful composure finally cracking. "How long have you known?" "About my father's crimes I found out this afternoon. About you, same time." Nathan leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Isabelle, I need you to understand something. I had no idea what my father did to your family. None whatsoever." "Right," Isabelle laughed bitterly. "The innocent son, completely unaware of how his family fortune was built." "It's the truth," Nathan insisted. "My father told me he'd built the company from nothing, through hard work and smart investments. I never had any reason to question it." Isabelle studied his face, looking for signs of deception. What she saw instead was pain, genuine anguish at learning the truth about his family's legacy. "Even if that's true," she said slowly, "it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring my father back or give me back my childhood." "No, it doesn't," Nathan agreed. "But Isabelle, there's something else you need to know. Something that affects both of us." He told her everything. About Derek Vaughn being Thomas Vaughn's son, about the conspiracy to kill him, about the connection between their families that went back decades. As he spoke, Isabelle's expression shifted from suspicion to shock to something approaching horror. "Derek Vaughn," she whispered. "I remember that name. He was at my father's funeral. A young man, maybe college age. He kept watching me, like he was memorizing my face. He's been planning this for years," Nathan said. "Using my wife, using the company, waiting for the right moment to strike, and last night, when you warned us away from Canyon Road, you saved my life from a murder plot 20 years in the making." Isabelle stood and walked to the window, looking out at her truck. "So what happens now? You know who I am, what I came here to do. Are you going to have me arrested?" Nathan joined her at the window. "What did you come here to do, Isabelle?" She was quiet for a long moment, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "For 20 years, I wanted to destroy the Hale family the way they destroyed mine. I wanted to take everything from you, to make you feel the same pain my father felt. She turned to face him. But you're not what I expected. Neither are you, Nathan admitted. The woman who saved my life last night. That's who you really are, isn't it? Not the revenge you've been planning, but the person who couldn't stand to see innocent people get hurt. I don't know anymore, Isabelle said honestly. I've spent so long being angry, being Grace Turner, the truck driver, instead of Isabelle Monroe, the victim. I don't know who I am without that anger. Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, one of the pictures Webb had given him, showing Isabelle as a young woman standing beside her father. This is who you are, he said, handing it to her. You're the daughter of a good man who was wronged by my father, but you're also the woman who chose to save a stranger's life instead of watching him die. That choice, that's who you really are. Isabelle took the photograph with shaking hands, tears forming in her eyes. Nathan, I need you to understand something. When I saw you at that truck stop, when I heard your name, I thought about letting you take Canyon Road. I thought about watching you drive to your death and calling it justice. But you didn't, Nathan said softly. You chose to save me instead. I chose to save you, Isabelle agreed, her voice breaking. And now I don't know what that makes me. Nathan moved closer, his voice gentle but determined. It makes you my ally because Isabelle, Derek, and Natalie aren't just coming after me. They know about you now. They know you interfered with their plans. That makes you a threat they'll want to eliminate. Isabelle looked up at him, fear and determination warring in her eyes. So what do you suggest we do? We work together, Nathan said. You want justice for your father's death. I want to stop the people who are trying to kill me. Derek Vaughn is responsible for both problems. And if we succeed, if we bring down Derek and expose what your father did, what happens to us then? Nathan was quiet for a moment. Considering the question, I guess we'll find out together. Isabelle held out her hand, and Nathan shook it solemnly. Partners, she said. Partners, Nathan agreed, not knowing that this handshake would bind their fates together in ways neither of them could imagine. 23 years earlier, 9-year-old Isabelle Monroe pressed her face against the cool glass of her bedroom window, watching the black sedans pull up the gravel driveway to their ranch house. The cars looked out of place among the rolling hills and cattle fences. Too clean, too expensive, like sharks swimming in a peaceful pond. Daddy's in trouble again, she whispered to her stuffed horse, Mr. Patches, clutching him tighter as she heard raised voices drifting up from the front porch. James Monroe stood on the steps of his family home, facing two men in expensive suits. Even from her second-floor window, Isabelle could see the tension in her father's shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Mr. Monroe, the taller man was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air. We're here to discuss your outstanding debts to Southwestern Development Corporation. I don't owe Southwestern anything, James replied firmly. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. You have no claim here. The second man, younger, with calculating eyes, pulled a folder from his briefcase. I'm afraid the paperwork says otherwise. Thomas Vaughn, legal counsel. These documents clearly show that you use this property as collateral for loans totaling $2.3 million. Isabelle watched her father snatch the papers, his face growing red as he read, This is garbage. Forgeries. I never signed anything like this. The signatures look authentic to me, the tall man said smoothly. George Hale, Southwestern Development. We've been very patient, Mr. Monroe, but patience has its limits, present day. Isabelle closed her eyes, the memory playing out in her mind like a movie she'd watched 1,000 times. She was sitting in Nathan's BMW, parked outside a diner where they'd agreed to meet for dinner. He'd wanted to hear her story, all of it, and she'd finally agreed to tell him. The adult Isabelle knew things the 9-year-old girl hadn't understood. The documents were indeed forgeries, but convincing ones. George Hale and Thomas Vaughn had spent months studying her father's signature, his financial habits, his trust in handshake deals and verbal agreements. They'd crafted the perfect trap for a man who believed in honor and good faith 20 years earlier. Isabelle, now 12 and sharper around the edges, sat in the hallway outside her father's study, listening to another argument. This one was different, though. Her father wasn't fighting with men in suits anymore. He was fighting with her mother. We have to tell her something, James, Sarah Monroe was saying, her voice strained with 3 years of legal battles. She knows things are bad. She hears us talking at night. She's just a child, Sarah. She shouldn't have to carry this burden. She's going to carry it anyway when we lose the house. Sarah shot back. At least if we're honest with her, she'll understand why. Isabelle crept closer to the door, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The lawyers say we have one more appeal, James said, but even 12-year-old Isabelle could hear the defeat in his voice. Morrison thinks he found something in the document analysis that might prove forgery. Morrison's been saying that for 2 years, Sarah replied wearily. James, maybe it's time to accept that we're going to lose. Maybe we should take the settlement offer and try to start over somewhere else. I won't give those bastards the satisfaction, James Monroe said with quiet fury. They want to steal our land. They want to destroy our family, fine. But I'll be damned if I'm going to make it easy for them. Isabelle had pressed her ear to the door, not understanding all the words but feeling the weight of them. Years later, she would realize that was the moment her father had given up hope. Everything after that was just pride and stubbornness keeping him upright. Present day. Nathan was waiting for her inside the diner, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall, a habit he'd developed since learning about the conspiracy against his life. He stood when she entered, and Isabelle was struck again by how different he was from what she'd expected. Gentle eyes, genuine concern in his expression, nothing like the monster she'd imagined for 20 years. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down across from him. "Thank you for listening," Isabelle replied. Most people don't want to hear sob stories about ancient history. This isn't ancient history, Nathan said firmly. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. If we're going to stop Derek, I need to understand how this all started. Isabelle ordered coffee and began to tell him about her childhood, about watching her family slowly disintegrate under the pressure of legal battles they couldn't win, and debts they'd never actually incurred. 15 years earlier, 17-year-old Isabelle stood in the kitchen of their much smaller apartment, stirring a pot of cheap pasta and listening to her father make phone calls in the next room. They'd lost the ranch 2 years earlier, along with most of their savings to legal fees. Her mother had taken a job at a grocery store, and her father did odd jobs when his pride allowed it. "Yes, this is James Monroe," her father was saying into the phone. "I'm calling about the investigative services advertised in the paper." Isabelle set down her spoon and moved closer to the doorway. "I need someone to look into document forgery, corporate fraud. It's been going on for years, and the police won't listen." There was a long pause. "No, I can't pay your usual rates, but I can offer you something else." Another pause. "Proof," James continued. "I've been documenting everything for 5 years. Names, dates, financial records. If you help me expose these people, you'll have enough evidence to bring down one of the biggest development companies in the Southwest." Isabelle had felt a spark of hope that night. Maybe her father wasn't as beaten as she'd thought. Maybe there was still a chance for justice. The investigator James hired was a former police detective named Robert Turner. He was in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a methodical approach to evidence gathering. He believed James Monroe's story when no one else would, and he worked tirelessly to build a case that would hold up in court. What Isabelle hadn't expected was falling in love with him. Present day. "Robert was everything I needed," Isabelle told Nathan, stirring sugar into her coffee with mechanical precision. "He believed my father, he believed in justice, and he made me feel like maybe the world wasn't entirely corrupt." "When did you and he," Nathan asked gently, "get together?" "About 6 months into the investigation. I was 18, he was 32. My parents weren't thrilled about the age difference, but they could see he was a good man." Isabelle's voice grew softer. "He was the first person who made me feel like Isabelle Monroe again, instead of just a victim of circumstances, 10 years earlier." 25-year-old Isabelle stood beside Robert's grave, rain mixing with tears on her face. The funeral was small, just her, a few of Robert's former colleagues, and the pastor who'd married them in a simple ceremony 2 years earlier. The official investigation into Robert's death had been perfunctory. Truck accident during a storm, driver error, case closed. But Isabelle knew better. Robert had been getting close to something, had been talking about a breakthrough in the case against George Hale and his associates 3 days before his death. He'd called her from the road, excitement clear in his voice. "Izzy, I think I found him. The accountant who helped them forge your father's financial records. He's willing to talk, but he wants immunity first." The next day, Robert Turner was dead. Standing at his graveside, Isabelle made 2 decisions that would define the rest of her life. First, she would continue Robert's investigation, no matter how long it took. Second, she would never again trust anyone enough to let them get that close to the truth. The people who'd killed her husband and destroyed her father were too powerful, too connected, too willing to eliminate anyone who threatened them. Isabelle Monroe died that day. Buried alongside her husband, Grace Turner was born from grief and determination, a new identity for a woman who had nothing left to lose. Present day. I've been Grace Turner for 10 years, Isabelle continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Learning to drive trucks, working the highways, following leads whenever I could. Robert's contacts helped me track down some of the smaller players, accountants, clerks, people who'd been paid to look the other way, but the big fish always stayed out of reach. Until you found me, Nathan said. Until you found me, Isabelle corrected. I'd been looking for George Hale for years, but he was already dead when I finally tracked down his son. You were supposed to be my way in, my chance to get close enough to learn the truth. And instead, Isabelle looked across the table at him, seeing not the enemy she'd imagined, but a man carrying his own burden of guilt and betrayal. Instead, I discovered that the son wasn't the father, that sometimes the children pay for their parents' sins without even knowing what those sins were. Nathan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I'm sorry, Isabelle, for what my father did to your family, for what you've lost, for all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. It changes more than you know, Isabelle replied softly. For 20 years, I've carried nothing but anger. It's been my fuel, my purpose, my identity. But sitting here with you, hearing the genuine regret in your voice, it's the first time I've felt anything other than rage when thinking about the Hale name. What do you feel now? Isabelle considered the question, surprised by her own answer. Hope. For the first time since Robert died, I feel like maybe justice is actually possible. Not revenge, justice. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. Then let's go get it together. As they left the diner, neither of them noticed the man sitting 3 booths away, the one who'd been listening to every word through the listening device planted in Isabelle's truck. Derek Vaughn's hired gun, Jack Brennan, smiled coldly as he reached for his phone. The players were finally all on the board. Now the real game could begin. Derek Vaughn stood in his home office, staring at the wall of law books that had once belonged to his father. Thomas Vaughn's collection was extensive: criminal law, corporate litigation, constitutional precedents. But Derek's favorite volume was tucked away behind the others. A handwritten journal that contained the real story of how fortunes were built and enemies were eliminated. His phone buzzed with a text from Brennan. Targets are working together. Recommend immediate action. Derek smiled coldly. He'd expected this development. Nathan Hale wasn't stupid, and neither was Isabelle Monroe. It was inevitable that they'd find each other. Inevitable that they'd try to join forces against him. What they didn't understand was that he'd been planning for this scenario for 20 years. 25 years earlier, 15-year-old Derek Vaughn sat in the back seat of his father's Mercedes, listening to Thomas and George Hale discuss their latest acquisition over brandy and cigars. The adults thought he was asleep, but Derek had learned early that the most valuable information came from conversations people thought no one else was hearing. The Monroe place should be finalized by next month, Thomas was saying, his voice thick with satisfaction. The old man's fighting it, but the paperwork is ironclad. What about the daughter? George asked. She's been asking questions around town. She's 9 years old, George. What's she going to do? George Hale's laugh was cold. 9-year-olds grow up, Thomas. They remember things. They hold grudges. Then maybe we make sure she doesn't get the chance to grow up with any illusions about what happened to her family. Derek had opened his eyes just enough to see his father's expression. Calculating. Merciless. The look of a man who viewed other people as obstacles to be removed. That night, young Derek learned 2 valuable lessons. Power came from information, and sentiment was a luxury that got people killed. Present day, Derek walked to his father's desk and opened the bottom drawer, revealing a hidden compartment that contained Thomas Vaughn's most sensitive files. The Monroe case was there, along with documentation of a dozen other acquisitions that had built the Vaughn-Hale fortune. But the file Derek really wanted was labeled simply, insurance policies. Inside were photographs, financial records, and personal information about every person who'd ever posed a threat to their operation. James Monroe was there, along with the accountant who'd helped forge the documents. Robert Turner's file was thick with surveillance photos and technical specifications for the accident that had claimed his life. And at the back, a newer file labeled Isabelle Monroe, Grace Turner. Derek had been tracking Isabelle for years. Ever since Robert Turner's investigation had started getting too close to the truth, he'd watched her transform from a grieving widow into a hardened truck driver, had monitored her movements across the country as she searched for evidence of his father's crimes. What she didn't know was that Derek had been feeding her information the entire time. 5 years earlier, Derek stood in the shadows of a truck stop in Nevada, watching Robert Turner meet with a nervous-looking accountant named Martinez. Turner was getting close. Too close. The accountant had been one of Thomas Vaughn's paid assets, and now he was ready to talk in exchange for immunity. Derek made a phone call. "Brennan, it's time. Make it look accidental, but make sure it's thorough." 2 days later, Robert Turner's truck went off Canyon Road during a storm, the same road where Derek now planned to eliminate Nathan Hale. There was a certain poetic justice to it, using the same method to eliminate both the investigator and his target. But Derek had made sure Isabelle survived. He needed her alive, needed her angry, needed her searching for answers that would eventually lead her exactly where he wanted her to go. Present day. Derek's phone rang, interrupting his memories. Natalie's name appeared on the screen, and he could hear the tension in her voice before she even spoke. "Derek, we have a problem. Nathan didn't come back to the resort last night. He left yesterday afternoon and hasn't returned. I'm worried he knows something." "Calm down," Derek said smoothly. "Where did he say he was going?" "Phoenix. Some business emergency that couldn't wait." Natalie's voice cracked slightly. "But Derek, what if he knows about us? What if he's planning something?" Derek smiled. Nathan was indeed planning something, but not what Natalie imagined. "Listen to me carefully, Nat. I need you to come home immediately. Tell the resort there was a family emergency. Don't pack everything. Make it look like you're planning to come back. Come home. But our anniversary weekend is over," Derek said firmly. "The timeline has moved up. We're going to plan B." Derek hung up and immediately dialed another number. Jack Brennan answered on the first ring. "I need you to arrange a meeting," Derek said. "Tomorrow night, Canyon Road, mile marker 15. Tell Isabelle Monroe that you have information about her husband's death, information that will lead her to the people responsible. What about Nathan Hale? He'll come with her. Men like Nathan think they're heroes. He won't let her face danger alone. The beauty of it is, they'll walk into the trap willingly." And after, Derek was quiet for a moment, thinking about his father's journal, about 20 years of careful planning finally coming to fruition. After, the last loose ends will be tied up, and Thomas Vaughn can finally rest in peace. Natalie's perspective. Natalie Hale drove back to Phoenix in a state of barely controlled panic. The weekend that was supposed to be a romantic farewell before Nathan's death had turned into a nightmare of suspicion and fear. Something had changed in her husband. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. What terrified her most was the possibility that Nathan had discovered her affair with Derek, not because she felt guilty. Natalie had stopped feeling guilty about anything years ago, but because it would complicate their plans in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. She'd married Nathan 10 years ago with clear intentions. He was wealthy, influential, and kind enough to overlook her obvious flaws. What she hadn't expected was how boring virtue could be. Nathan never lied, never cheated, never did anything more exciting than work late at the office. Living with him was like being married to a saint. And Natalie had always preferred sinners. Derek, on the other hand, was everything Nathan wasn't. Dangerous, ambitious, willing to do whatever it took to get what he wanted. When he'd seduced her 3 years ago, Natalie had felt alive for the first time since her wedding day. The plan to kill Nathan had been Derek's idea, but Natalie had embraced it enthusiastically. $500 million in life insurance, plus her inheritance from the company, would set them up for life. They could travel the world, live in luxury, never have to pretend to be something they weren't. But now, Nathan was acting suspicious, asking questions, disappearing for mysterious business meetings. If he knew about the conspiracy, if he was gathering evidence. Natalie's phone rang. startling her from her dark thoughts. Derek's name appeared on the screen. "I'm almost home," she said without preamble. "Good. We need to talk in person. Things are moving faster than we planned. Derek, I'm scared. What if Nathan knows? What if he's already gone to the police?" "He hasn't gone to the police," Derek said with certainty. "If he had, we'd already be in custody. No, Nathan's playing a different game. He thinks he can outsmart us. Thinks he can be the hero who exposes the villains and saves the day." "Can he?" Derek's laugh was cold. "Nathan Hale is about to learn the same lesson his father taught James Monroe 20 years ago. Good people don't win, Natalie. They just make interesting victims. The trap is set." Meanwhile, in a cheap motel room across town, Isabelle and Nathan were planning their next move. They'd spent hours going through Robert Turner's old files, cross-referencing them with the information Nathan's investigator had provided. The picture that emerged was damning. A conspiracy that stretched back decades, involving dozens of victims and millions of stolen dollars. "We have enough evidence to destroy Derek and expose what happened to your father," Nathan said, spreading documents across the motel room bed. "But we need something more recent, something that ties him directly to the current conspiracy." "What about Natalie? If we could get her to admit her part in the plot," Nathan shook his head. "She's too careful, too paranoid. We need to catch Derek in the act, get him to incriminate himself." Isabelle's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I have information about Robert Turner's death. Meet me tomorrow night. Canyon Road, mile marker 15. Come alone, or you'll never learn the truth." She showed the message to Nathan, who frowned as he read it. "It could be a trap," he said. "Of course it's a trap," Isabelle replied. "But it might also be our only chance to get the evidence we need. Derek's not going to confess unless he thinks he's won." Nathan studied her face, seeing the determination that had kept her searching for 20 years. "If we do this, we do it together. No more working alone, no more secrets." Isabelle nodded, but privately she was already planning. If this was indeed a trap, if Derek was finally ready to make his move, then she would make sure Nathan survived it. She'd failed to save her father and her husband, but she wouldn't fail Nathan Hale. Tomorrow night, on the same road where her husband had died and Derek had planned Nathan's murder, the final confrontation would begin, and this time, Isabelle Monroe was ready for war. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Phoenix had seen better days. Broken windows let in shafts of late afternoon sunlight that illuminated dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. Nathan and Isabelle had chosen this place for their planning session because it was far from prying eyes and electronic surveillance, or so they thought. The message came from a burner phone, Nathan said, studying the text on Isabelle's device. "Whoever sent it doesn't want to be traced." Isabelle nodded, spreading out a map of Canyon Road on an overturned crate. "Mile marker 15 is right here, about 2 miles from where Robert died. It's a section of road with steep drops on both sides and very few escape routes. Perfect for an ambush," Nathan observed grimly. "Which is why we're not going in blind." Isabelle pointed to several locations on the map. "These are all the access points to that section of road. If Derek is planning something, he'll have people positioned here, here, and here." Nathan was impressed by her tactical thinking. "You've done this before." "I've been preparing for this confrontation for 10 years, Isabelle replied. "I may have been a truck driver, but I spent every spare moment learning about surveillance, self-defense, evidence gathering. Robert taught me some of it before he died, and I learned the rest on my own." They were interrupted by the sound of gravel crunching outside. Both of them froze, listening intently. Nathan moved to the broken window and peered out carefully. "It's okay," he said, relief evident in his voice. "It's Marcus Webb." The private investigator entered the warehouse looking like he'd been running marathons. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, and there was urgency in his movements that made both Nathan and Isabelle immediately alert. "We have a problem," Webb said without preamble. "Derek Vaughn knows you two are working together." "How?" Nathan demanded. "He's had Isabelle under surveillance for months, maybe longer. I found listening devices in her truck, tracking equipment, the works. He's been monitoring her every move." Isabelle felt sick. "How long?" "Based on the equipment I found, at least 6 months, maybe more." Webb's expression was grim. "He's been playing a longer game than any of us realized." Nathan ran his hands through his hair, processing this information. "So he knows we met. knows we're planning something. He knows more than that, Webb continued. I intercepted some communications between Derek and a man named Jack Brennan, ex-cop. Currently works as what you might call a problem solver. They're planning something for tomorrow night. Isabelle's blood ran cold. Brennan, I know that name. Robert mentioned him once. Said he was the kind of cop who took money to look the other way. Not anymore, Webb said. Now he's the kind of man who makes problems disappear permanently, and you two are his current assignment. The warehouse fell silent, except for the sound of wind whistling through the broken windows. Nathan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. By involving Isabelle in his fight against Derek and Natalie, he'd put her in even greater danger. There's more, Webb continued reluctantly. I did some digging into Derek's background, and what I found is disturbing. The man's not just ambitious, he's genuinely unstable. His father's death wasn't a suicide like the official report said. What do you mean? Isabelle asked. Thomas Vaughn was murdered by his own son. Webb pulled out a folder filled with photographs and documents. Derek was home from law school when it happened. The police found Thomas dead in his study with a gun in his hand and a suicide note on his desk. But the handwriting analysis was inconclusive, and there were inconsistencies in the evidence. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. Derek killed his own father. I believe so, and I think I know why. Webb opened the folder, revealing photographs of financial documents. Thomas Vaughn was getting nervous about the Monroe case. He'd kept detailed records of everything they'd done. Insurance. I suppose in case George Hale ever tried to pin everything on him, but those records were also evidence that could destroy both families. So Derek killed him to keep him quiet, Isabelle said, understanding dawning in her voice. And to take control of those records, Webb confirmed. Derek's been using his father's files to blackmail people, to cover up evidence, to eliminate threats. He's been cleaning up his father's messes for 20 years, but he's also been making new ones. Isabelle stood and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape. Robert got too close to the truth about Thomas Vaughn's death, didn't he? That's why Derek had him killed. I believe so, Webb said gently. Your husband was a good investigator, Isabelle. He was following the money trail from the Monroe case, and it led him straight to evidence of Thomas Vaughn's murder. Nathan joined Isabelle at the window, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry. I know how much you loved him. He died because he believed in justice, Isabelle said quietly. Because he couldn't let what happened to my family go unpunished. She turned to face Nathan and Webb. Which means we can't let Derek win. Not just for our sake, but for Robert's, for my father's, for all the people Derek and his father destroyed over the years. Webb nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right attitude. But we need to be smart about this. Derek's expecting you to show up tomorrow night, and he's planning to kill you both. We need to turn that expectation against him. What do you have in mind? Nathan asked. Webb spread out additional maps and photographs on the crate. We're going to give Derek exactly what he wants. A meeting on Canyon Road where he thinks he has all the advantages. But we're going to change the game on him. How? By making sure he's not the only one with backup, Webb explained. I have contacts in the FBI, agents who've been investigating corporate fraud cases for years. They'd love to get their hands on evidence about the Vaughn-Hale conspiracy. Isabelle raised an eyebrow. And they'd be willing to help us. They'd be willing to help you, Webb corrected. You're a victim seeking justice, not a criminal planning revenge. There's a big difference in the eyes of the law. Nathan felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. So we go to the meeting, but with federal backup hidden nearby. Exactly. Derek thinks he's luring you into a trap, but actually we're luring him into one. The key is making him believe he's won, making him confident enough to confess his crimes on tape. Isabelle considered this plan, thinking about all the years she'd spent planning her own version of justice. It could work. Derek's arrogant enough to gloat when he thinks he's beaten his enemies. There's one more thing, Webb said hesitantly. Natalie's involved in this deeper than we originally thought. She's not just Derek's lover. She's been helping him plan operations for over 2 years. The FBI wants her too. Nathan felt another piece of his old life crumble away. His marriage hadn't just been loveless. It had been a deliberate deception from the beginning. How long has she been working with him? Based on financial records and communication logs, since about 6 months after they started their affair. Derek's been grooming her, training her, turning her into his partner in crime. Isabelle moved away from the window and rejoined the conversation. So tomorrow night, we're not just facing Derek and his hired gun, we're facing Natalie too. She'll be there, Webb confirmed. Derek won't want to leave any loose ends. Nathan looked at Isabelle, seeing determination mixed with fear in her brown eyes. You don't have to do this. Webb and I could handle it with the FBI. You've already risked enough. Isabelle shook her head firmly. No, this started with my family, and it's going to end with my family. Besides, she smiled grimly, Derek's expecting Grace Turner, the simple truck driver. He has no idea what Isabelle Monroe is really capable of. Webb gathered up his maps and documents. I'll contact my FBI friends tonight and set up the surveillance for tomorrow evening. In the meantime, I suggest you both get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As Webb left the warehouse, Nathan and Isabelle found themselves alone again. The late afternoon sun was fading, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Are you scared? Nathan asked. Terrified, Isabelle admitted, but also relieved. For 20 years, I've been carrying this weight, this need for justice. Tomorrow night, one way or another, it ends. Nathan moved closer to her, and Isabelle was surprised to find herself drawn to his presence over the past few days. He'd become more than just an ally in her fight against Derek. He'd become someone she genuinely cared about, someone she didn't want to lose. Isabelle, Nathan said softly, whatever happens tomorrow night, I want you to know that meeting you has changed everything for me. Not just because you saved my life, but because you showed me what courage really looks like. Isabelle felt tears forming in her eyes. Nathan, I need to tell you something. When I first saw you at that truck stop, when I heard your name, part of me wanted to let you drive to your death. Part of me thought it would be justice for what your father did to mine. But you didn't, Nathan said, his voice full of understanding rather than accusation. No, I didn't. Because looking at you, I realized you weren't your father. You were just a man trying to do the right thing, and I couldn't let an innocent person die for someone else's sins. Nathan reached out and took her hand. Tomorrow night, we finish this together. Isabelle squeezed his hand, feeling something she hadn't experienced since Robert's death, hope for a future beyond revenge. Together, she agreed, not knowing that Derek Vaughn was already putting the final pieces of his plan into motion. The sunset-painted canyon road in shades of blood and gold, as Nathan and Isabelle approached mile marker 15. Isabelle's hands were steady on the steering wheel of her truck, but Nathan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw was set with determination. They'd spent the entire day preparing for this confrontation, going over every detail with Webb and the FBI agents, who were now hidden in the rocky outcroppings above the road. Remember, Nathan said softly, we need Derek to confess on tape. The recording equipment Webb gave us will pick up everything, but we need to get him talking about specific crimes. Isabelle nodded, her eyes scanning the road ahead. He'll want to gloat. Men like Derek can't resist explaining how clever they've been, especially when they think they're about to win. As they rounded a curve in the road, they saw 3 vehicles parked at mile marker 15. Derek's silver Audi, Natalie's white Lexus, and a black SUV that probably belonged to Jack Brennan. The setting sun reflected off their windshields like watching eyes. This is it, Isabelle whispered, pulling her truck to a stop 50 feet away from the other vehicles. Derek emerged from his Audi first, looking every inch the successful lawyer in his expensive suit and confident posture. Natalie got out of her Lexus next, and Nathan felt a stab of pain seeing his wife of 10 years standing beside her lover. She looked beautiful as always, but there was something cold and predatory in her expression that Nathan had never noticed before. The third figure who emerged from the SUV was clearly Brennan, tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of an ex-cop and the dead eyes of a professional killer. His hand rested casually on what was obviously a concealed weapon. Nathan and Isabelle climbed down from the truck, walking forward slowly with their hands visible. The desert wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of another storm. Well, well, Derek called out as they approached. The unlikely partnership Nathan Hale and the infamous Isabelle Monroe. Isabelle felt her heart skip at hearing her real name spoken aloud. So you know who I am? I've known who you are for years, Derek replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Did you really think you could hide from me forever? Grace Turner was a clever disguise, but not clever enough. Nathan stepped slightly in front of Isabelle, his protective instincts kicking in. Let's cut to the chase, Derek. What do you want? What I want, Derek said, beginning to pace like a professor giving a lecture, is to finish what my father started 20 years ago. The Monroe family was supposed to disappear completely after James Monroe's suicide, but somehow little Isabelle slipped through the cracks. Your father didn't start anything, Isabelle said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. He was a thief and a murderer who destroyed innocent families for money. Derek's expression darkened. My father was a visionary who understood that the weak deserved to be eliminated by the strong. Just like George Hale understood it. Natalie spoke for the first time, her voice dripping with disdain. Nathan, I have to say, I'm impressed. I never thought you had the spine to figure out what was happening. I was starting to think I'd married the most gullible man in Arizona. Nathan felt the sting of her words, but forced himself to remain calm. How long, Natalie? How long have you been planning to kill me? Since about 6 months after Derek and I became lovers, she replied casually. 3 years of pretending to love you, of letting you touch me, of playing the devoted wife. Do you have any idea how exhausting that was? Why? Nathan asked, genuine pain in his voice. Was it just the money? Derek laughed. Oh, Nathan, you still don't get it, do you? This was never just about money. This was about justice. Real justice, not the kind they teach in law school. Justice, Isabelle spat. You call murdering innocent people justice. I call it evolution, Derek replied coldly. The strong survive. The weak perish. My father and George Hale understood that principle. They built an empire by eliminating obstacles, by taking what they needed from people too weak to defend it. Nathan felt pieces clicking together in his mind. You killed your own father. Derek's smile widened. Now you're catching on. Thomas Vaughn was getting weak, getting nervous about the Monroe case. He wanted to confess, to make amends, can you imagine? After all they'd accomplished together, he wanted to throw it away because of guilt. So you murdered him and made it look like suicide, Isabelle said. I liberated him from his weakness, Derek corrected, and I took control of all his files, all his evidence, all his leverage. Do you know what kind of power comes from having detailed records of every crime committed by the Vaughn-Hale partnership? Brennan shifted restlessly, clearly growing impatient with Derek's monologue. Boss, we should wrap this up. Those FBI boys you're worried about could show up anytime. Nathan and Isabelle exchanged glances. Derek knew about the FBI surveillance. Derek noticed their reaction and laughed. Did you really think I wouldn't know about Webb's little friends? I've been monitoring all of you for days. Your FBI backup is currently dealing with some false emergencies I arranged across town. By the time they realize what's happened, you'll both be just another tragic accident on Canyon Road. Isabelle felt cold fear creeping up her spine, but she forced herself to keep talking. What about Robert? Why did you have to kill my husband? Robert Turner was getting too close to the truth about my father's death, Derek explained. He'd found the accountant who helped forge your father's documents, and that accountant was ready to talk. I couldn't allow that. So you had Brennan run him off the road, Isabelle said, her voice breaking slightly. Actually, I did that one myself, Derek said with pride. Personal touch, you understand. Your husband was a good investigator, but he never saw it coming. The beauty of using the same stretch of road was the poetic justice, the place where so many of our problems have been resolved. Nathan felt rage building in his chest. You're insane. I'm efficient, Derek corrected, and speaking of efficiency, it's time to end this family reunion. He gestured to Brennan, who reached for his weapon. That's when everything went wrong. Isabelle moved faster than anyone expected, pulling a gun from her jacket and pointing it directly at Derek. Nobody moves. Nathan stared at her in shock. Isabelle, where did you get that? I've been carrying it for 10 years, she replied, her voice deadly calm. Ever since Robert died, I've been preparing for this moment. Derek held up his hands, but his expression remained confident. Isabelle, you're not a killer. You're angry. You're hurt. But you're not capable of cold-blooded murder. You're right, Isabelle said. I'm not, but I am capable of justice. That's when the second surprise came. Nathan pulled out his own recording device and held it up for everyone to see. Everything you just said was broadcast live to the FBI field office. Webb set up a direct transmission before we came here. Derek's confidence finally cracked. That's impossible. I had all your communications monitored. You monitored the communications you knew about, Nathan replied. But Webb used a completely different system, one that bypassed all your surveillance. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, and suddenly the road was flooded with lights as FBI vehicles surrounded the area. Agents in tactical gear emerged from behind rocks and brush, their weapons trained on Derek. Natalie and Brennan. Derek Vaughn, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and the murder of Thomas Vaughn, the lead agent called out through a megaphone. Derek looked around wildly, realizing his carefully laid plans had crumbled. This isn't over, he shouted, as agents moved in to arrest him. You think you've won, but there are others. The corruption goes deeper than you can imagine. As Brennan was tackled and cuffed, Natalie made one last desperate play. She pulled a small pistol from her purse and pointed it at Nathan. If I can't have the money, at least I can have the satisfaction of... Isabelle's shot rang out across the desert. Precise and clean, Natalie's weapon flew from her hand as the bullet struck her wrist, and she collapsed to the ground screaming. That was for 20 years of lies, Isabelle said quietly, as the FBI agents took control of the scene. Nathan turned to Isabelle with amazement and gratitude. How did you know to bring a gun? How did you know this would happen? Isabelle holstered her weapon and looked at him with tired but relieved eyes. Because I've been hunting these people for 20 years, Nathan. I learned to think like them, to plan like them, to be ready for anything they might do. But the FBI surveillance, the backup plan, was real, Isabelle confirmed. But I've learned never to trust anyone completely, never to rely on just one plan. I came here prepared to end this with or without help. Nathan reached out and took her hand. It's over. Finally, it's over. Isabelle squeezed his hand, feeling 20 years of anger and pain finally beginning to fade. No, Nathan, it's not over. It's just beginning. As Derek and Natalie were loaded into federal vehicles, as Brennan was read his rights, as the sun finally set over Canyon Road, Nathan and Isabelle stood together facing an uncertain but hopeful future. The truth had been revealed. Justice was finally being served. And for the first time in decades, both of them could imagine a life beyond revenge and fear. 3 weeks after the arrests on Canyon Road, Nathan sat in the witness waiting room of the Federal District Court in Phoenix, reviewing his testimony one final time. The prosecution had built an airtight case against Derek, Natalie, and Brennan. But today would determine whether justice was truly served, or if legal technicalities would allow the guilty to escape punishment. Isabelle paced near the window, her nervous energy filling the small room. She'd traded her truck driver clothes for a simple but elegant dress. The first time Nathan had seen her look like the Isabelle Monroe she'd been before tragedy reshaped her life. The defense is going to try to discredit us, she said, not for the first time that morning. They'll paint me as a vengeful woman seeking revenge, and you as a bitter husband looking for payback. Nathan stood and moved to her side. Let them try. We have evidence, recordings, and 20 years of documented crimes. The truth is stronger than their spin. The door opened, and Marcus Webb entered with federal prosecutor Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who'd built her career on taking down white-collar criminals. How are we feeling? Chen asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Ready, Nathan replied. What's the latest from Derek's legal team? They're claiming temporary insanity, emotional distress from discovering his father's alleged crimes, Chen said with obvious disdain. They're trying to paint Derek as another victim of the Von Hale conspiracy, Isabelle snorted. A victim who murdered his own father and spent 20 years covering up crimes. That's exactly what we're going to prove in there, Chen assured her. The jury's been hearing testimony for 3 days about Thomas Vaughn's death, about the forged documents, about the pattern of intimidation and murder. Derek's own recorded confession sealed his fate. Webb consulted his notes. What about Natalie's plea deal? Still on the table, Chen replied. If she testifies truthfully about Derek's role in planning Nathan's murder, we'll reduce her charges from attempted murder to conspiracy. She'll still do significant time, but not life. Nathan felt conflicted about his wife's potential plea bargain. Part of him wanted her to face the full consequences of her actions, but another part just wanted the whole nightmare to end. "There's something else," Chen continued. "Derek's been trying to make a deal. He claims he has information about other murders. Other victims of the Von Hale operation. He wants immunity in exchange for cooperation." "Absolutely not," Isabelle said immediately. "He doesn't get to trade information for freedom. Too many people have died because of his family's crimes." "I agree," Nathan added. "Derek needs to face justice for what he's done." Chen nodded approvingly. "That's what I told his lawyers. The best we're offering is life without parole instead of the death penalty. Take it or leave it." A bailiff appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Chen, they're ready for your next witness." Isabelle took a deep breath and smoothed her dress. "That's me." Nathan caught her hand as she walked past. "Just tell the truth. That's all we need." Isabelle squeezed his fingers and followed the bailiff toward the courtroom. Nathan watched her go, marveling at her strength. After everything she'd endured, she was still fighting for justice with the same determination that had kept her searching for 20 years. Inside the courtroom, the federal courthouse was packed with reporters, victims' families, and legal observers. Derek sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his expression calm and calculating, even facing multiple life sentences. He looked like a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything. Natalie sat at a separate table with her own legal team. She'd lost weight during her weeks in custody, and the designer clothes had been replaced with a simple orange jumpsuit. When she looked at Nathan in the gallery, there was no remorse in her eyes, only anger at being caught. "The prosecution calls Isabelle Monroe to the stand," Chen announced. Isabelle walked to the witness box with steady steps, raising her right hand to be sworn in. Her voice was clear and strong as she promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. "Mrs. Monroe," Chen began, "please tell the court your real name and explain why you've been living under an assumed identity." Isabelle looked directly at the jury as she spoke. "My name is Isabelle Monroe. 23 years ago, when I was 9 years old, my father James Monroe owned 15,000 acres of ranch land in Arizona. George Hale and Thomas Vaughn stole that land through forged documents and legal manipulation. When my father tried to fight back, they destroyed him financially and psychologically. He killed himself rather than face the disgrace they'd brought upon our family." The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of reporters' pens. Isabelle continued her testimony, detailing her years of investigation, her marriage to Robert Turner, and his murder on Canyon Road. "When Derek Vaughn had my husband killed," Isabelle said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes, "I realized that the children of George Hale and Thomas Vaughn were continuing their father's work. I became Grace Turner because Isabelle Monroe was too dangerous a target, but I never stopped searching for justice." Derek's attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Morrison, stood for cross-examination. "Miss Monroe, isn't it true that you came to Phoenix specifically to kill Nathan Hale?" "No," Isabelle replied firmly. "I came to Phoenix to find evidence of the crimes committed against my family. But you've carried a concealed weapon for 10 years. I've carried protection." "Yes. When people have already murdered your husband, you learn to be prepared." Morrison tried a different approach. "You admit that you wanted revenge against the Hale family." Isabelle was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I wanted justice. I wanted the truth to come out. I wanted the people responsible for my father's death and my husband's murder to face consequences for their actions. And when you met Nathan Hale at that truck stop, didn't you see an opportunity for revenge?" "I saw an opportunity to save an innocent man's life," Isabelle replied. "Nathan Hale had nothing to do with his father's crimes. He was as much a victim as anyone else." Morrison pressed harder. "But you could have let him take Canyon Road. You could have allowed what you considered poetic justice to occur." Isabelle's eyes flashed with anger. "What Derek and Natalie planned wasn't justice. It was murder. I may have spent 20 years angry about what happened to my family, but I would never stand by and watch an innocent person die, even if that person's last name was Hale. Especially because his last name was Hale," Isabelle said with conviction. "Nathan Hale represents what his family should have been. Honest, decent, committed to doing the right thing. By saving his life, I was saving the possibility that the Hale name could be redeemed." Morrison tried several more angles of attack, but Isabelle remained calm and consistent. When Chen stood for redirect examination, she asked only one question. "Ms. Monroe, Do you believe justice has been served in this case? Isabelle looked directly at Derek, who stared back with undisguised hatred. Justice will be served when Derek Vaughn and his accomplices are held accountable for their crimes, when the victims' families know the truth. When the pattern of corruption and murder that started with our fathers finally ends. As Isabelle left the witness stand, Nathan felt overwhelming pride in her courage and integrity. She'd faced down her demons and emerged stronger than ever. The prosecution rested their case, and Derek's attorneys began their defense. But it was clear from the jury's expressions that the evidence was overwhelming. Derek's recorded confessions, the physical evidence from multiple crime scenes, and the testimony of surviving victims painted a picture of systematic criminality spanning 2 generations. When Derek finally took the stand in his own defense, his arrogance proved to be his downfall. He tried to justify his actions, to present himself as someone cleaning up his father's mistakes, rather than perpetuating them. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt," he claimed. "I was trying to protect my family's reputation." Chen's cross-examination was devastating. She played his recorded confession from Canyon Road, where he'd boasted about murdering his father and planning Nathan's death. "Does this sound like someone trying to protect their family's reputation?" she asked. Derek's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. They destroyed everything. My father, Nathan's father, they built something great, and these people wanted to tear it down." "By these people, you mean the families they robbed. They were weak," Derek shouted. "They deserved what happened to them." The outburst sealed his fate. Even his own lawyers looked horrified by his words. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts, Derek Vaughn was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Natalie received 25 years for her role in the conspiracy. Brennan got life for multiple murders as the judge read the sentences. Nathan reached for Isabelle's hand. They'd done it. After 20 years of pain and loss, justice had finally been served. But as they left the courthouse together, both of them knew their real journey was just beginning. 6 months after the trial, the morning sun cast long shadows across the Monroe family cemetery as Isabelle knelt beside her father's weathered headstone. In her hands, she held a newspaper clipping announcing the final settlement that would return the stolen lands to their rightful owners. Not just her family's property, but dozens of other parcels that George Hale and Thomas Vaughn had illegally acquired over the years. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, placing fresh wildflowers against the granite marker. Justice took 23 years, but it finally came. Nathan stood respectfully nearby, giving Isabelle the privacy she needed for this moment. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had evolved from desperate alliance to genuine partnership, to something deeper that neither of them had dared to name. They'd worked together to establish the Monroe Hale Justice Foundation, using Nathan's resources and Isabelle's determination to help other families who'd been victims of corporate fraud. "The lawyers called this morning," Nathan said gently when Isabelle stood and brushed dirt from her knees. "The final paperwork went through. Your family's land is officially yours again." Isabelle looked out over the rolling hills that had once been her childhood home. The ranch house was long gone, demolished years ago to make way for a shopping center that had never been built. But the land itself remained. 15,000 acres of Arizona desert that held a lifetime of memories. "What will you do with it?" Nathan asked. "I've been thinking about that," Isabelle replied, walking toward the cemetery gate. "Maybe build a retreat center for families affected by corporate crime, somewhere they can come to heal, to plan their fights for justice." "That sounds perfect," Nathan said. Meaning it, the foundation could fund it, provide legal support. They walked in comfortable silence toward Nathan's car. He'd sold the BMW months ago, saying it held too many painful memories. Now he drove a practical SUV that could handle both city streets and desert roads. "Nathan," Isabelle said as they reached the vehicle, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned to face her, noting the serious expression on her face. "What is it?" "I've been offered a job. The FBI wants me to join their white-collar crime division as a consultant. They think my experience investigating corporate fraud could help other cases." Nathan felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in her recognition, concern for her safety, and something that might have been fear at the thought of losing her. "That's incredible, Isabelle. You'd be amazing at it. The position is based in Washington," she continued, watching his face carefully. I'd have to relocate. Nathan was quiet for a moment, processing this information. When would you start? That's up to me, Isabelle said. I haven't given them an answer yet because I wanted to talk to you first. Before Nathan could respond, his phone rang. Marcus Webb's name appeared on the screen. Sorry, Nathan said. I should take this. Webb's been helping us track down some of the other victims from my father's files. Nathan. Webb's voice was urgent even through the phone speaker. We have a problem. Derek's been granted a hearing for his appeal. His new lawyers are claiming prosecutorial misconduct. Nathan felt his stomach drop. What kind of misconduct? They're saying the FBI surveillance of the Canyon Road meeting was illegal, that Derek's confession should be thrown out. If they succeed, he could get a new trial. Isabelle had been listening to the conversation, and Nathan could see the familiar fire of determination building in her eyes. When's the hearing? Nathan asked. Next month, but Nathan, there's more. Derek's been talking in prison, making deals with other inmates. Word is he's got people on the outside who are still loyal to him, people who might want revenge against you and Isabelle. Nathan looked at Isabelle, seeing his own concern reflected in her face. We'll deal with it, Webb. Just keep us informed. After hanging up, they stood in the desert silence, both understanding that their fight might not be over after all. So much for our peaceful new beginning, Isabelle said with a bitter laugh. Hey, Nathan said, taking her hands in his. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what partners do. Isabelle looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her heart race. Partners. Well, Nathan said, his voice growing softer. I was hoping we might be more than that. Before Isabelle could respond, Nathan knelt on one knee in the desert dirt, pulling a simple but elegant ring from his pocket. Isabelle Monroe, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me what real courage looks like, what it means to fight for justice even when the odds are impossible. I can't imagine facing whatever comes next without you by my side. Isabelle stared at him in shock, her hands trembling. Nathan, I know this isn't the most romantic setting, he continued with a smile, but this place represents everything we've been through together. Your family's land, your father's memory, the justice we fought to achieve. I want to build our future on that foundation. Isabelle felt tears streaming down her face. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to be my partner in everything. Marriage, the foundation, fighting whatever battles come next. I'm asking you to help me turn the Hale name into something honorable again. Isabelle looked around at the cemetery where her father was buried, at the land that had been stolen and returned, at the man who'd helped her find justice after 20 years of searching. The FBI job suddenly seemed less important than the opportunity to build something meaningful with Nathan. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, of course. Yes. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. 3 months later, the wedding was small and simple, held at sunset on Isabelle's reclaimed land with only their closest friends and colleagues in attendance. Marcus Webb served as Nathan's best man, while Sarah Chen, the prosecutor who'd put Derek away, stood beside Isabelle as her maid of honor. As they exchanged vows, both Nathan and Isabelle spoke about redemption, about the possibility of creating something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Isabelle promised to help Nathan transform his family's legacy from one of corruption to one of justice. Nathan vowed to support Isabelle's continued fight for victims of corporate crime. The past doesn't define us, Isabelle said, looking into Nathan's eyes. Our choices do. Our actions do. The love we choose to build instead of the hate we could have carried. Judge Williams, a family friend who'd known James Monroe, performed the ceremony. By the power vested in me by the state of Arizona, he said with a smile, I now pronounce you husband and wife. As Nathan and Isabelle kissed under the desert stars, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the ridge above the cemetery. Derek's cousin, Marcus Vaughn, lowered his binoculars and reached for his phone. They got married, he reported to someone on the other end. Just like you said they would. Perfect, came the reply. Now we know exactly where to find them when the time comes. But even this shadow over their happiness couldn't diminish the joy Nathan and Isabelle felt. They'd found love in the aftermath of betrayal, hope in the wake of loss, and justice after decades of injustice. 1 year later, Isabelle stood in the main hall of the Monroe Hale Justice Center, watching families affected by corporate crime share their stories with FBI investigators and victim advocates. The retreat center had become more than she'd ever imagined, not just a place for healing, but a launching pad for dozens of successful legal cases against corrupt corporations. Nathan approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Hale." Isabelle leaned back against his chest, still marveling at how natural it felt to be called by his name. "Just thinking about how different things are now, a year ago. I was Grace Turner, living in truck stops and cheap motels now. Now you're Isabelle Hale, terror of white-collar criminals everywhere." Nathan finished with a chuckle. "The FBI officially offered me the consulting position again," Isabelle said. "Full-time, based here in Arizona, so I wouldn't have to leave the center." "And I said yes," Isabelle replied, turning in his arms. "Someone has to make sure Derek stays locked up, and there are too many other families who need justice." Nathan kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud too." Isabelle looked around at the center they'd built together. Part retreat, part legal aid clinic, part monument to the idea that good people could triumph over corruption if they refused to give up. "You know what the best part is?" she asked. "What's that?" "We didn't just get revenge. We got something better. We got the chance to make sure this never happens to other families. We turned our pain into purpose." Nathan smiled, thinking about the dozens of cases they'd helped resolve, the millions of dollars in stolen assets they'd helped return to rightful owners, the corrupt officials and corporate criminals they'd helped bring to justice. "Sometimes," he said, "the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, Nathan and Isabelle Hale stood together in the Justice Center they'd built from love and determination. Ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring, they'd learned that sometimes the most broken people can create the most beautiful redemption stories, and that love born from shared purpose is the strongest foundation of all. The road that had brought them together had been long and painful, marked by loss and betrayal, but it had led them exactly where they needed to be, fighting for justice, building a legacy of hope, and proving that even the darkest family histories can be rewritten by those brave enough to choose a different path.